What's up, guys? It is time for Q&A for the week. I was not able to answer this yesterday. I wasn't home all day. So this is actually Q&A from 10/23/17, and it's 10/24 today. So go ahead and get it done, though. This was Instagram this time instead of Facebook. So let's see what we have here. All right. When cutting, do you prefer T3, T4 over Clen, or a combination of all? Typically, what dose would you max out on pre-contest? Well, I mean, they're doing two different things entirely. So synergistically, yeah, they can work good together. But obviously, thyroid's going to be downregulated in prep normally, or when you're in a prolonged calorie deficit. Just a defense mechanism of the body, just like your hormones can downregulate. Thyroid hormone can as well. You're like your sex hormones, I should say, testosterone and what have you. So, keeping your thyroid in normal range, high normal range, or even slightly above could be beneficial in terms of fat burning. It's going to speed up metabolism. I mean, yeah, that's it. I mean, you're speeding up thyroid, everything's speeding up. So, you're going to burn calories more efficiently. It's not like, most people know it's not super selective on calories. It's just raising caloric expenditure as a whole. Not necessarily selective fat muscle. So Clen, on the other hand, could be potentially anti-catabolic. There's some literature to support that. So could be a good addition. Depending on how the person reacts to it, really, there's also some downsides to it. But that would probably be... A lot of people will add that first before they go the thyroid route. The thyroid thing's tricky. It just kind of depends on if somebody needs it or not. Just because if their thyroid stays in normal range and they have a healthy thyroid, high normal the whole time, probably don't really need it. They won't get a ton of benefit from it. But someone that has a thyroid that definitely downregulates and there's evident signs of that metabolically, then yeah, they probably benefit from it. And they might even, one could argue they might even be a little bit healthier in prep by using it. So in that case, you would combine the two. Dose-wise, normal replacement dose for thyroid is going to be something around 100 plus T4 and about 37.5 milligrams of T3, give or take, depending on the person, what puts them in a good range on their labs. But it's going to be somewhere around there. And then Clen, most people just want to start low. 20 micrograms is really long active life. So you can pretty much take it whenever, and it's going to be in the system, though. I would argue probably just take it in the morning and at least be a little less active in the blood by evening time. And that way, it's not lingering while you're sleeping as much, though there's still going to be some there. The intent would be that you would still be able to sleep, hopefully. Though, in prep, sleep tends to suck anyhow, so. And then obviously just work up dosing from there to maybe, again, person dependent, but I just don't see any reason for anyone to go over 100. Start getting into these crazy, 160, 180, 200. I don't think it's necessary. And then obviously side effects are going to be a lot more prevalent at that dose. Okay, next one. You previously done an article explaining why you shouldn't have carbs and healthy fats in the same meal. I went back to read it and had lost it. I'd like to know more on the topic. I don't know what article that was. I may have said that, but there's probably some context to that because that's a contextual kind of statement. I mean, could be bad, could be good. Kind of depends on the metabolic flexibility of the person. How easy can their body shift between fuel sources? What do they need? What's depleted in their body? Is muscle glycogen depleted or intramuscular triglycerides depleted? Do they need both? Do they need to separate them at all? I would say in general, you could argue that the body might be a little bit more efficient at partitioning one macronutrient at a time rather than trying to initiate the metabolic process to partition fat while also doing it with carbs instead of just doing one at a time. But again, if someone's really metabolically flexible, they might not have any problem doing that. That's just kind of an optimization thing, getting that extra 1%. But obviously everything's going to come down to thermodynamics at the end of the day, and then these are just your little nuances. I'm not, like I said, I would kind of need to know the context to that and what I wrote it. When I write stuff like that, I normally say, hey, this is whatever the situation is, and then I kind of expand on it from there. That way it's not just a blanket statement, because there aren't really any absolutes, Next one. What are your thoughts on the benefits of fascia stretching following training? I always do it, but I don't feel that I have much knowledge on it. Okay. Yeah, that kind of came around with, I don't actually know where that originated, but I mean, most people probably think that originated from DC training, which is really where I heard about it from. It's the extreme stretching, air quotes. That's stretching the actual fascia tissue, and it's pretty painful. I will say, okay, I could say a couple things, or at least one thing. With the stretching, to actually get much benefit out of it, you're looking at least probably 20, 30 seconds, give or take, maybe more, in that deep stretch to really lengthen the tissue, to expand it. So I would say, at the very least, if you're going to do those extreme stretches, do that. I don't know that there are any actual studies saying if you perform this fascia stretching after the weight training program, it provides this benefit. Meaning they took the same exact weight training program for two groups, and one of them did fascia stretching and one of them didn't, and then the fascia group made more progress. I don't know that there's something like that exists. I could be wrong. Maybe something does. I don't know. But in theory, you're helping stretch that tissue out, more blood flow, letting that muscle expand better. And then just make sure you do it long enough and do it hard enough. How do you balance progress for someone who needs to train low volume due to scheduling issues? Does progressive overload through load become your primary focus? Yeah, so somebody that only has a very limited time to train, they might have to have a lower volume approach, which obviously volume is a big driver of hypertrophy, so that becomes an issue because you can't really utilize volume. In which case, they might have to rely more on just progressive overload, which is another driver of hypertrophy. So yeah, that would be it. I mean, essentially, you would have to rely on that solely for the most part. I mean, you could add in some things for capillary density, like your cell swelling work, which doesn't take very long. Could be 1 or 2 sets, 100 plus reps of whatever body parts you're trying to work on. Doesn't really cut into recovery. Just because the load's so light. And I've talked about this. You can jump on my Facebook and just search it. It's on there. But you could add that as another way to add volume and also add that cell swelling effect. So, and then obviously primary driver would be progressively overloading your movements. All right, DMP, carbs, no carbs, keto, your opinion, best diet approach. I don't think it matters that much. I don't know. I don't like to get into this because there's such differing camps, and it works both ways. It's such a strong compound that in an effective dose, it works both ways. You can make arguments for both, because excess heat and raising body temperature is one of the I don't know if I want to call it a benefit, but one of the things that makes it do what it does. It's not necessarily a benefit. It's kind of a side effect, but more carbs would enhance that, though at the same time, it also severely depletes glycogen. So less carbs would just make that process happen quicker. And in theory, you should burn off, fats quicker. But it's all coming down to calorie deficit in either situation. A lot of people that do carbs, they'll actually increase their carbs and eat a lot more food when they're using it, and they're not even in a calorie deficit at that point. Yeah, their body heat goes up, their metabolic rate skyrockets, they're burning through tons of glycogen, but they're eating tons of extra carbs, so then nothing happens. So make sure you're in a modest calorie deficit, mild calorie deficit, and then that's going to put you in a big calorie deficit beyond that point. That would be, first and foremost. Any thoughts on Trenbolone increasing T4-T3 conversion, considerations there for the anabolic properties of exogenous T3 when running Trenbolone in a growth phase? That's an interesting one, because I remember a study, and I think it was a little older. It's probably like early 2000s, maybe 2005, 4, 3, something like that, about T3 and protein, so protein turnover and protein breakdown, muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. And what happened was, as T3 went up, muscle protein breakdown was actually higher than muscle protein synthesis. So I know a lot of people, not a lot, but some people will talk about using T3 in the off season for enhanced muscle protein synthesis or turnover, which it does. But if the breakdown is higher than the synthesis, then I'm not really sure that there's much benefit in that regard. And then with the Trenbolone thing, here's the thing. You could look at that. You could look at a lot of people that talk about using T4 with growth hormone because your levels decrease. I would say this: if you know that you look at labs and your levels are actually low, then it might be worth using a replacement dose to get them in high normal range. But if the levels aren't actually low, then you're already in an optimal range, normal, high normal. You're not going to get a whole lot of benefit out of increasing. And like I said, that literature that I mentioned, the study that I mentioned, showed that you're actually going to have a lot higher muscle protein breakdown than synthesis. So you could argue maybe it's not beneficial. And I've never really seen anything other than people's placebo effect that says that it does that much. People think that it does, and then so therefore they use it. They think it's supposed to do something, so it does. But in reality, they probably have a little bit higher muscle protein synthesis from the T3, and they're probably having also higher muscle protein breakdown, but obviously the anabolics are offsetting any catabolic effect that's there. So it's kind of all evening out. I don't know if it's ever doing anything. I've never seen anyone get any kind of noticeable benefit from it. We'll say that. But then I also mentioned a situation where you might benefit from it. So it's kind of my answer on that. All right. Do all of your clients never come off? If so, do what? Yeah. If some do, what PCT protocols do they use? Well, not all of them are enhanced, and some of them are natural athletes too. But as far as the ones that are enhanced, it's just depends on a couple things. It depends on their health, depends on their personal preference. That's a personal choice. I can advise and make suggestions, but it's a personal choice at the end of the day. PCT protocols, things like the traditional SERMs, Clomid is pretty traditional. It tends to work. You could triptorelin, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, is actually a peptide that also works really well. The issue tends to be that I'm not going to go into the whole how it works. It's in the whole like chemical castration thing that everyone fears and stuff. But the issue with that tends to be whether what they're getting is real or not. So traditionally, your Clomid PCT is pretty common, and that tends to be the number one go-to. I'm not sure if there's anything else in the question. And normally it's 50 to 100 milligrams starting, maybe 50 straight through 4 weeks, give or take. That works pretty well for most people. Though the thing is, some people just, depending on how many times they've run cycles and how old they are and what their baseline hormones are like to begin with, they just might not recover. Like they might recover temporarily and have temporarily elevated testosterone from the SERM, but it just goes right back down after they stop and they just don't recover. So it's one of those things, if you're going to do it, you kind of commit to it and know that you're going to end up on pretty much forever, or definitely on forever, and know that maybe you can do PCT a few times and you'll recover, but eventually that recovery is probably going to get harder and it's just not going to happen, so not going to go through some elaborate PCT protocol because not that many people do it. That's not a question. That's not a question. Last one. Nutrient timing vary person to person. Does it? Yeah, sure, it could. I mean, I think there's certain things that are pretty optimal throughout. For most people, eat carbs when you're most insulin sensitive. Probably keep insulin and blood sugar levels low other times of the day. Maybe utilize fats for a fuel source. Spread protein out so you optimize protein synthesis. I mean, that's pretty much standard across the board, though there's going to be some nuances person to person. And I think that part of that is most of those things, most of what makes one person the most insulin sensitive is going to do the same thing to the other person to some degree, but the difference might be in how they feel and perform. Like I had a discussion this morning, not really a discussion, but it was a Facebook comment about not having carbs pre-workout. Some people just feel better. Their blood sugar is more stable. They don't have a peak in the valley. Those carbs don't really digest fast enough to store as glycogen and produce and do much for the person in all reality. We talked about using no carbs pre-workout and how a lot of people just do really well with it. But I have other people that use carbs pre-workout. So it might be a performance thing and how somebody feels, cognitively and performance-wise. But in general, the same things that make one person, the same things that optimize nutrient timing for one person are pretty much going to be the same for the other person. And then it just comes down to those other factors, like I said. And then last question, I lied. There is one more. I got a couple minutes. So deload or a few days to a week off. Burnt out bad, strength down, 30-week competitive season. What do you feel is optimal? Well, if you just came off a 30-week prep or you're actually in a prep, I don't know. I'm just going to assume in general, probably going to need I would maybe say at least start with a few days off. And then if you train the rest of the week, nothing anywhere close to failure. You say burnt out bad. I don't know how bad is, but you might even need a 2-week deload. You might need to start with like few days off, 3-4 days off completely, and then just go back into training maybe every other day for the rest of the 2 weeks, but training to maybe a RP of 6, maybe 7 at most on the exercises. Nothing even remotely close to failure. No super heavy loads. Just basically getting the blood flowing, keeping the tissue fed with blood and nutrients and protein, and you're still partitioning nutrients, staying insulin sensitive, all that good stuff, without actually taxing your CNS to any significant degree. Adding any other recovery modalities in there that you can, all the funky hippie shit that I talk about, like float sessions, doing meditation, yoga, deep breathing, just get more sleep. That's good. That one always works. All that stuff will become beneficial at that point. Not that it's beneficial in general, but it'll become even more beneficial if you're burnt out. So I would say start with at least a week, few days off, then a few days of just low intensity training. See how you feel. Be honest with yourself though. If you still feel like ass, then do another week. Mentally, I know a lot of people don't like to completely just stop for a long time, and I feel like you don't necessarily have to, but if you're not going to stop, then you have to actually lower the intensity enough for the deload to work. So you need to mentally do whichever one you think you can handle the best. And that is it, guys. We're just over 20 minutes. I know some of those I wasn't able to answer super specifically, but there's just context to some of these questions that makes it difficult. But for the most part, these are pretty good questions. A couple real good ones in there. So I will talk to you guys next week.